Jake Thompson had exactly three things going for him in life. He could fix anything with moving parts, he made the best coffee in Millbrook County, and he had absolutely zero filter between his brain and his mouth. 2 out of 3 of those qualities were about to get him in the kind of trouble that makes international headlines. It was pushing midnight on a Tuesday when the whole mess started. Jake was elbow deep in the engine bay of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick, wrestling with a carburetor that had apparently decided to spite him personally. The garage smelled like motor oil, burnt coffee, and the kind of determination that comes from being too stubborn to admit defeat. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, applying what his father had always called percussive maintenance to a particularly stubborn bolt. "I've fixed lawn mowers more cooperative than you." That's when the sky outside lit up like someone had set off a flare, followed by a sound like a freight train having an argument with a blender. Jake poked his head out from under the hood just in time to see something that definitely wasn't supposed to be in the airspace above rural Kentucky come screaming toward his garage. The crash behind his building shook every tool off his pegboard and set off 3 car alarms in the parking lot. Jake grabbed his flashlight and headed out back, muttering every curse word he'd learned in 20 years of fixing other people's mechanical disasters. What he found was about 12 feet of twisted metal that looked like someone had tried to build a sports car out of tinfoil and Christmas lights. Sparks were shooting out of various holes, and the whole thing was making a noise like a dying computer having a seizure. "Well," Jake said to nobody in particular, "that's new." The hatch popped open with a hiss that sounded expensive, and out unfolded something that made Jake seriously reconsider his position on the whole "are we alone in the universe" question. The thing was 7 feet tall, blue-green, and wearing what looked like a jumpsuit designed by someone who'd never actually seen a human body. It had 4 arms, eyes like dinner plates, and an expression that somehow managed to convey both panic and profound irritation. "Primitive biped," it said in a voice like silk being run through a garbage disposal. "I require immediate mechanical assistance. My quantum propulsion matrix has suffered catastrophic harmonic resonance failure." Jake blinked. "You're what now?" "My ship is broken, you simple creature." "Oh well, why didn't you just say so?" Jake walked around the wreckage, shining his flashlight into various smoking holes. "You know, for someone asking for help, you've got a real attitude problem." The alien made a sound like a tea kettle learning to swear. "I am Zorp of the 7th Engineering Caste. My people have been manipulating quantum mechanics since before your species discovered fire. I hardly think a primitive tool user like yourself could comprehend, much less repair, technology of this sophistication." Jake stopped walking and looked at Zorp with the kind of expression usually reserved for tourists who asked for directions to the downtown area in a town with 1 stoplight. "Listen, Zorp of the 7th whatever, I don't care if your people invented the wheel. Right now, you're standing in my backyard with a busted ride, asking for my help. So you can either dial down the attitude and let me take a look, or you can wait here for AAA to show up. And buddy, I got a feeling they're gonna be a while." Zorp's forearms crossed in what was probably the universal gesture for "fine, but I'm not happy about it." For the next 3 hours, Jake did what he did best. He poked, prodded, cursed, and occasionally hit things with a wrench until they started working again. The quantum propulsion matrix turned out to be a fancy name for an engine that ran on principles Jake didn't understand but could fix with spare parts from his garage, a car battery, and enough duct tape to hold together a small aircraft. "This is completely absurd," Zorp kept saying as Jake welded a piece of exhaust pipe to what looked like a crystalline power core. "You cannot simply attach crude chemical batteries to a quantum field generator. The harmonic frequencies are completely incompatible." "Maybe," Jake said, not looking up from his work, "but sometimes the best way to fix fancy stuff is with boring stuff that actually works." When Jake finally stepped back and wiped his hands on his coveralls, Zorp's ship was humming like a cat that had just discovered a tuna factory. The lights had stopped sparking, the seizure noise had stopped, and everything glowed with a soft blue light that probably wasn't going to give them all cancer. "There you go," Jake said. "Should get you home wherever that is." Zorp stared at his repaired ship like Jake had just turned water into wine using nothing but a socket wrench and an attitude. This is impossible. You used primitive materials to create a more stable quantum matrix than our best engineers achieve with purpose-built components. Sometimes simple works better than complicated." Jake shrugged. "My dad always said the best tool for any job is usually the one you've already got in your hand." Zorp climbed back into his ship, still muttering what sounded like alien curse words mixed with engineering terminology. Before closing the hatch, he looked back at Jake with something that might have been respect if respect could be expressed through dinner plate-sized eyes. "Human Jake Thompson," he said, "you may be primitive, but you are not without merit." "Thanks, I guess," Jake said. Try not to crash into anyone else's backyard. The ship lifted off with a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane and disappeared into the night sky, leaving Jake alone with his flashlight, a pile of scrap metal, and the growing suspicion that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his life. He went back inside, finished Mrs. Henderson's carburetor, and went to bed, thinking the whole thing had been some kind of weird dream brought on by too much coffee and not enough sleep. He was wrong about that, very, very wrong. Jake woke up at 6:30 the next morning to the sound of helicopters circling his house like vultures at a roadkill buffet. He stumbled to his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, and nearly dropped it on his foot. 3 black SUVs were parked in his driveway. Not the kind of black SUVs that soccer moms drive to Whole Foods, but the kind that show up in movies right before someone's life gets complicated in ways that require a really good lawyer. Well, Jake said to his coffee, this can't be good. He'd barely gotten his pants on when someone started pounding on his front door with the kind of authority that suggested they weren't selling Girl Scout cookies. Jake opened it to find a woman in a black suit who looked like she'd been professionally trained to not find anything funny, ever. Jake Thompson? She asked. She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer and wasn't particularly happy about it. Depends who's asking. She flashed a badge that had more letters than Jake cared to count. Agent Collins, Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. We need to talk. Department of what now? Jake rubbed his eyes, wondering if he was still dreaming. Lady, I fix cars for a living. The most extraterrestrial thing I deal with is Mrs. Patterson's Honda that she bought in Japan. Agent Collins pushed past him into his living room, followed by 2 guys who looked like they'd been carved out of granite and fed nothing but protein powder and disappointment. Mr. Thompson, we have satellite footage of an unidentified craft landing behind your garage at 11:47 p.m. last night. We also have thermal imaging of you interacting with what appears to be a non-human entity for approximately 3 hours. Jake's coffee suddenly tasted like regret with a side of oh crap. Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but we also have this. Agent Collins held up a tablet showing security camera footage that was definitely Jake, definitely his garage, and definitely not something he could explain away as swamp gas or weather balloons. On the screen, Jake watched himself welding alien technology while a 7-foot blue creature lectured him about quantum mechanics. It was remarkably clear footage for something that was about to ruin his life. Huh, Jake said, because sometimes honesty is the only policy left when lying won't get you anywhere. That's definitely me. Where is the entity now? Entity. Jake laughed, which probably wasn't the reaction Agent Collins was hoping for. His name is Zorp, and he left about 3 hours ago in his fixed spaceship. Which, by the way, you're welcome for preventing an interstellar incident when that thing crashed in my backyard. One of the granite guys stepped forward. Thompson, you need to understand the gravity of this situation. The being you assisted has caused what our intelligence services are calling a diplomatic crisis of unprecedented magnitude. What kind of diplomatic crisis? Jake asked, though he was starting to get the feeling he didn't want to know the answer. Agent Collins swiped her tablet, showing what looked like a star map with lots of angry red dots. According to our extraterrestrial contacts, the entity you helped escape is named Zorp Klaxonian, heir to one of the most powerful technology dynasties in the Galactic Confederation. He was apparently on an unauthorized joyride when he crashed on Earth. So he's basically a rich kid who borrowed daddy's car. A rich kid whose unauthorized trip to a restricted planet violates about 17 different interstellar treaties. Collins said. His people are demanding your immediate extradition for technological contamination of advanced systems with primitive methodologies. Jake stared at her. They want to arrest me for fixing their broken spaceship. They want to arrest you for fixing it too well. Collins said. Apparently your repairs were more effective than anything their best engineers could have achieved. They're claiming you've somehow corrupted their technology with human methods. Outside, Jake could hear more helicopters arriving. Through his window he could see what looked like a small army setting up camp in his front yard. His neighbor Mrs. Henderson was standing on her porch in her bathrobe, probably wondering why the nice boy who fixed her Buick was suddenly the most interesting person in a 50-mile radius. So let me get this straight, Jake said, sitting down hard in his recliner. I helped a stranded alien fix his broken ship, which makes me some kind of interstellar criminal, and now his people want to drag me off to space court for being too good at my job. That's an extremely simplified version, but essentially correct. Jake looked around his living room, at the coffee-stained carpet and the TV that still had rabbit ears because cable was too expensive. at the life he'd built in this small town where the biggest excitement was usually the annual corn festival. And what happens if I say no to this whole extradition thing? Agent Collins and her granite companions exchanged the kind of look that people share when they're about to deliver really bad news. Mr. Thompson, she said, there are currently 47 alien enforcement vessels in Earth's orbit, and more arriving every hour. If we don't resolve this situation quickly, your little repair job might just start the first interstellar war in human history. Jake took a long sip of his coffee and stared out the window at the helicopters, the government agents, and the neighbor who was now taking pictures with her phone. You know what, he said, finally. I should have just let the blue guy fix his own damn spaceship. But even as he said it, Jake couldn't help feeling a little proud. After all, how many small-town mechanics could claim they'd accidentally become the most wanted handyman in the galaxy? Agent Collins set up what she called a temporary command center in Jake's garage, which was a fancy way of saying his workspace was now crawling with people in suits who kept touching his tools and putting them back in the wrong places. Jake sat on his favorite rolling stool, watching government technicians poke at the scrap metal Zorp had left behind like archaeologists discovering fire. So explain to me again why this is such a big deal, Jake said, spinning his stool in a slow circle. Rich alien kid takes daddy's ship for a joyride, crashes it, I fix it, he goes home. Seems like a happy ending to me. Agent Collins looked up from a tablet that was apparently receiving updates from every intelligence agency with an acronym. Mr. Thompson, do you understand what the Galactic Confederation is? Nope, but I'm guessing it's not the local homeowners association. The Confederation represents over 12,000 inhabited worlds across this section of the galaxy. They've been watching Earth for the past 50 years, deciding whether humanity is ready for contact. We're what they call a probationary species. Jake raised an eyebrow. Probationary, think of it as being on trial. They're evaluating whether humans are stable enough, mature enough, and technologically advanced enough to join galactic civilization. We've been making good progress. Small steps, careful diplomacy, proving we're not going to immediately start wars or blow things up. And then I came along and fixed a spaceship with duct tape. And then you came along and fixed a spaceship with duct tape, Collins confirmed. Zorp Klaxonian is the son of Supreme Engineer Klaxon, who owns the largest technology consortium in 3-star systems. When Zorp took his father's prototype vessel for an unauthorized trip to a restricted world, he violated about 50 different laws and treaties. One of the granite guys, who Jake had mentally nicknamed Agent Grumpface, looked up from a piece of twisted alien metal. The political ramifications are staggering. Zorp's father is demanding his son's immediate return, claiming Earth has corrupted him with primitive technology. 3 different species are calling for trade sanctions. The Regellian Empire is questioning whether humans can be trusted with advanced technology at all. Jake spun his stool faster. Okay, but here's the thing I don't get. I helped the kid. His ship was broken, I fixed it. He went home. Isn't that what good neighbors do? That's exactly the problem, Collins said. She pulled up a holographic display that made Jake's garage look like something out of a science fiction movie. This is a quantum propulsion matrix, the same type of engine that powers their fastest starships. It takes teams of their best engineers months to build one, using materials that cost more than most countries' annual budgets. The hologram showed a complex crystalline structure that looked like someone had tried to build a chandelier out of math. When these engines break down, they have to be completely rebuilt from scratch. The quantum field alignments are so precise that even the smallest deviation makes them useless. Jake looked at the twisted pile of metal in the corner of his garage. Okay, so you fixed theirs in 3 hours using a car battery and spare parts from a 1987 Chevy. Sometimes simple solutions work better than complicated ones. That's what has them terrified. Agent Grumpface said, according to their engineers, what you did should have been impossible. You somehow created a more stable quantum matrix than anything they've ever achieved, using technology they consider primitive. Collins pulled up another display, this one showing what looked like a space traffic control system with lots of moving dots. Those red dots are Confederation enforcement vessels. They started arriving about 6 hours ago. The blue dots are ships from species that want to study your repair techniques. The yellow dots are from governments that think you've somehow stolen classified technology. Jake counted the dots. There were a lot of them. How many ships is that? 47 as of an hour ago. More are arriving every few minutes. And they're all here because I helped some kid fix his car. They're here because you've accidentally proven that human engineering might be superior to theirs in ways they don't understand. Collins sat down on a crate of motor oil, suddenly looking very tired. Mr. Thompson, do you realize what this means? Jake stopped spinning his stool. Enlighten me. For 50 years the Confederation has been treating humanity like promising children who might someday be ready to play with the grown-ups. They've been carefully controlling our technological development, deciding what we're ready to learn and when. The idea that a human mechanic could improve their most advanced technology using scrap metal threatens their entire worldview. Agent Grumpface pulled up another display showing what looked like a family tree, if family trees were made of spaceships and political alliances. Supreme Engineer Klaxon has 3 choices. He can admit that human technology has value which would undermine his political position and potentially destabilize the tech consortium he controls. He can claim his son was corrupted by exposure to primitive methods, which would allow him to maintain face but would require your punishment as an example. Or he can declare the entire incident a fabrication and claim you stole classified technology. And if he goes with option 2 or 3, option 2 means you get dragged off to a Confederation prison planet for technological heresy. Option 3 means Earth gets invaded for harboring technology thieves. Jake looked around his garage, at the tools his father had given him, at the workbench where he'd learned to fix everything from lawn mowers to spaceships. So basically, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't, and damned if I sit here and do nothing. That's a remarkably concise summary of our situation, yes. Through the garage door, Jake could see more government vehicles arriving. The helicopters had been joined by what looked like mobile command units, and his quiet street now resembled a disaster movie set. Mrs. Henderson was still on her porch, but now she had company. Half the town had apparently decided that Jake's front yard was the most interesting place to be on a Wednesday morning. Agent Collins, Jake said. I've got a question for you. What's that? In all these fancy reports and diplomatic cables and whatever, has anyone bothered to mention that I actually did them a favor? Their kid was stranded on a strange planet with a broken ship. I helped him get home safely. Where I come from, that's called being neighborly. Collins looked at him with something that might have been respect. Mr. Thompson, you might be the first person in this entire mess who's focused on what actually matters. Which is the fact that when faced with someone who needed help, you helped them. No questions asked, no payment expected, no political calculations. You just did what needed doing. Jake nodded. That's what people do. That, Collins said, is exactly what the Confederation is afraid of. Outside, another wave of helicopters passed overhead, and Jake's phone started ringing with calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. He looked at the caller ID, sighed, and let it go to voicemail. So what happens now? He asked. Agent Collins stood up, brushing dust off her suit. Now Mr. Thompson, we find out whether the galaxy is ready for humanity, or whether humanity is ready for the galaxy. And if the answer is neither. Collins looked out at the growing crowd of government agents, alien ships in orbit, and curious neighbors with smartphones. Then I hope you're as good at fixing interstellar relations as you are at fixing quantum engines. Jake laughed, which was probably not the reaction anyone expected from someone who just learned he might have started a galactic war. Agent Collins, I hate to break it to you, but I'm just a mechanic. I fix things that are broken, and right now, it sounds like the whole galaxy could use a tune-up. 3 days later, Jake was under what he'd started calling luxury house arrest in a government facility that looked like a cross between a 5-star hotel and a maximum security prison. The food was better than anything he'd ever eaten, the bed was more comfortable than his couch back home, and he was absolutely completely, mind-numbingly bored. That's when Agent Collins showed up with a metal case that looked like it had been through a blender and then set on fire. We need your help, she said, without preamble, setting the case on the table in Jake's suite. Jake looked up from the crossword puzzle he'd been failing to complete for the past hour. I thought I was a dangerous criminal who corrupted advanced technology with my primitive human methods. You are. That's exactly why we need you. Collins opened the case, revealing what looked like a crystalline sculpture that someone had attacked with a sledgehammer. This is a Vraxian communication array. It was confiscated from a smuggler's ship 6 months ago. Our best scientists, the ones with PhDs in quantum mechanics and theoretical physics, have been trying to make it work ever since. Jake leaned forward, his professional curiosity overriding his annoyance at being locked up. What's it supposed to do? Long-range quantum entanglement communication. Instant messaging across galactic distances. If we could get it working, it would revolutionize how we communicate with our off-world contacts. And your fancy scientists can't figure it out. Collins pulled up a holographic display showing what looked like a complicated diagram covered in red X's and question marks. They've mapped every component, analyzed every quantum frequency, and run simulations for hundreds of hours. Nothing. They keep saying it's like trying to fix a symphony orchestra when you've never heard music. Jake stood up and walked over to the case. The device was about the size of a toaster, made of what looked like crystal and metal woven together in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Half of it was cracked, several components were missing, and the whole thing had the defeated look of technology that had given up trying to work. So what makes you think I can fix it when your PhDs can't? Because Collins said, 3 days ago, you fixed a quantum propulsion matrix with a car battery and some exhaust pipe. And word is starting to get around. She pulled up another display, this one showing what looked like a galactic social media feed. These are intercepted communications from various alien species. Apparently, news of your repair job has spread through their networks faster than we anticipated. Jake read over the translations. The human of impossible repairs has created a new quantum paradigm. Primitive methods yield superior results. Request immediate consultation with Earth's miracle engineer. Jake Collins said, we're getting requests from 17 different species, asking if you can fix their broken technology. Equipment that their best engineers have given up on. Things that have been sitting in warehouses for decades, because nobody could figure out how to make them work. And you want me to become the galaxy's handyman. I want you to prove that humans belong in the Confederation as equals, not as junior partners waiting for permission to use grown-up technology. Jake picked up one of the broken crystal components, holding it up to the light. It was beautiful, in a way that suggested whoever had made it cared more about elegance than practicality. You know what the problem is with all this fancy alien tech, enlighten me. They're so worried about doing things the right way, that they forget the point is to make things work. Jake set the crystal down and started examining the device's internal structure. Look at this connection here. They've got this beautiful crystalline matrix that's supposed to maintain perfect quantum coherence, but it's fragile as glass. One little vibration, and the whole thing falls apart. So how would you fix it? Jake grinned, and Collins suddenly understood why the Confederation was so nervous about human engineering. Simple, I'd make it less perfect. Over the next 6 hours, Jake worked on the Vraxian communication array while Collins watched and took notes. He didn't use exotic materials, or quantum computers, or any of the sophisticated tools the government scientists had employed. Instead, he used a soldering iron, some copper wire from an old lamp, and what looked like components from a 1990s radio. This is insane, Collins said as Jake carefully soldered a piece of terrestrial copper wire between 2 alien crystals. You're connecting technologies that are thousands of years apart in development. That's the point, Jake said, not looking up from his work. Their crystals are amazing for maintaining quantum coherence, but they need something to stabilize them when things get rough. Copper wire isn't pretty, but it's reliable. It doesn't care about quantum frequencies or harmonic resonance. It just conducts electricity, and keeps conducting electricity until something physically breaks it. But how do you know it will work? Jake paused in his soldering. I don't. But that's the thing about fixing stuff. You don't need to understand all the theory. You just need to understand what's broken and what might fix it. When Jake finally stepped back, the communication array looked like something from a steampunk fever dream. Alien crystals were connected to human electronics with copper wire and solder joints. A small cooling fan from an old computer was somehow integrated into the quantum matrix. The whole thing should have been an abomination that violated every principle of advanced engineering. Instead, it hummed to life with a sound like wind chimes and a gentle breeze. Collins stared at the device as holographic displays began appearing above it, showing connection indicators and data streams from across the galaxy. It's working. Of course it's working. Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag that had somehow appeared from his pocket. The alien parts do what they're good at. The human parts do what they're good at, and together they make something better than either could manage alone. Collins was already on her phone, presumably calling every scientist and government official she could think of. While she talked, Jake sat back and watched the communication array cycle through what looked like incoming messages from dozens of different worlds. That's when he realized something that probably should have occurred to him earlier. Agent Collins. She looked up from her call. What? How exactly are we going to explain to the Confederation that their technology works better when you fix it with Radio Shack parts? Collins stared at him for a long moment, then started laughing. It wasn't the kind of laugh that suggested she found something funny. It was the kind of laugh that suggested she just realized they were all in much deeper trouble than anyone had imagined. Mr. Thompson, she said, I think we're about to find out whether the galaxy is ready for human engineering, or whether human engineering is about to revolutionize the galaxy. And if it's neither. Collins looked at the communication array, which was now displaying what appeared to be a queue of over 300 incoming messages from various alien species, all apparently requesting Jake's services. Then I suggest you brush up on your customer service skills, because it looks like you're about to become the most popular repairman in galactic history. Jake looked at the queue of requests, each one representing some piece of advanced alien technology that had defeated the best engineers in the galaxy. You know what, he said. I think I'm going to need a bigger toolbox. 2 weeks later, Jake found himself standing in the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations, which had been hastily converted into what Agent Collins called a neutral diplomatic venue. What it actually looked like was a courtroom designed by someone who'd watched too many science fiction movies and had access to a Hollywood special effects budget. The human delegation sat on one side, looking nervous, and occasionally glancing at tablets that displayed real-time updates from the 43 alien ships now in Earth's orbit. On the other side of the hall, separated by what appeared to be a force field that sparkled like Christmas lights, sat the alien representatives. And at the center of it all, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, was Zorp. This is so much worse than I thought it would be, Jake muttered to Agent Collins, who was sitting beside him in what she'd called the defendant's chair. It gets worse, Collins whispered back. The big guy in the fancy robes is Supreme Engineer Klaxon, Zorp's father. The one who looks like a walking tree made of crystals is Ambassador Thys from the Confederation Council. And the thing that looks like it escaped from a nightmare about geometric shapes is Enforcement Director Vexkic. Jake studied the alien delegation. Supreme Engineer Klaxon was impressive in the way that mountains are impressive. You know they're powerful, but you really hope they don't decide to fall on you. He was nearly 9 feet tall, covered in what looked like living metal, and his eyes glowed with a light that suggested he was not having a good day. Ambassador Thys looked like someone had convinced a tree to grow in the shape of a person, then decorated it with crystals that pulsed with soft blue light. Every time they moved, Jake could hear a sound like wind chimes being played by a gentle breeze. Enforcement Director Vexkic was the stuff of nightmares. They appeared to be made of shifting geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, and when they spoke, their voice sounded like mathematics having an argument with itself. Human Jake Thompson, Klaxon said, his voice like thunder being filtered through a symphony orchestra. You stand accused of technological heresy, corruption of advanced systems, and the deliberate sabotage of Confederation property. Jake stood up, which probably wasn't protocol, but he'd never been good at following rules anyway. Your Honor, or your engineerness, or whatever I'm supposed to call you, I helped your kid fix his broken spaceship. Where I come from, that's called being a good neighbor. You contaminated a quantum propulsion matrix with primitive materials, Vexkic interjected, their geometric form shifting into what might have been an expression of disgust. The harmonic resonance patterns you introduced are completely contrary to established engineering principles. Yeah, but it worked. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when someone says something so obvious that everyone else realizes they've been overthinking the problem. That, said Ambassador Thys in a voice like leaves rustling in an autumn breeze, is precisely the issue. Your repairs should not have worked. According to every law of quantum mechanics, every principle of advanced engineering, every theorem of harmonic resonance theory, what you accomplished was impossible. Jake shrugged. Sometimes impossible just means nobody's tried the right approach yet. Supreme Engineer Klaxon leaned forward, his metal features shifting into what might have been a scowl. Human, do you understand what you have done? For 3,000 years my family has been the premier technology developer in this sector of the galaxy. Our quantum matrices are the most advanced, most sophisticated, most precisely calibrated systems ever created. And you improved them with scrap metal and chemical batteries. Actually, Jake said, I think the duct tape was probably the most important part. Agent Collins grabbed his arm. Jake, maybe don't antagonize the 9-foot-tall alien overlord. No, let him speak, Klaxon said. I am curious to hear how a primitive tool user justifies corrupting advanced technology with such crude methods. Jake looked around the assembly hall, at the nervous human diplomats, the imposing alien delegation, and the reporters who were broadcasting this conversation to every inhabited world in the galaxy. You want to know what I think? I think you've all forgotten what technology is supposed to do. Enlighten us, Vexkic said, their geometric form shifting into what might have been sarcasm. Technology is supposed to solve problems. It's supposed to make life better, easier, safer. It's supposed to work when you need it to work, not just when conditions are perfect. Jake walked over to the evidence table, where pieces of Zorp's original engine were displayed next to holographic readouts of his repairs. Your quantum matrix was beautiful, elegant, sophisticated, and completely useless when it broke down. Quantum matrices are precision instruments, Klaxon said. They require perfect harmonic alignment, exact resonance frequencies, and pure crystalline substrates. Any deviation from optimal parameters results in catastrophic failure. Exactly, Jake said. You built something so perfect that it can't handle the real world. So when your son's ship hit some turbulence, or cosmic radiation, or whatever broke it, your perfect engine became an expensive paperweight. He picked up one of the hybrid components from his repair job. This isn't pretty. It's not elegant. It doesn't follow your engineering principles, but it works. It works when it gets banged around, when the power fluctuates, when conditions aren't perfect. It works because it's designed to work, not to be impressive. Your methods are crude, Thys said. They're crystal decorations pulsing with what might have been indignation. You solve complex problems with simple solutions. You ignore sophisticated theory in favor of practical results. Yeah, Jake said. The silence stretched out again, but this time it felt different. This time, it felt like the moment when a complicated problem suddenly reveals a simple solution. You cannot simply dismiss millennia of advanced engineering, Claxon said, but his voice had lost some of its thunder. Our methods are proven, tested, refined through centuries of development. And my methods work, Jake said. Look, I'm not saying your technology is bad. It's amazing, but it's like owning a Ferrari that breaks down every time it rains. Sure, it's fast and beautiful and impressive, but if you can't drive it to work, what's the point? Zorp, who had been silent through the entire proceeding, suddenly stood up. Father, he's right. The reaction from the alien delegation was immediate and dramatic. Lights flashed, harmonics fluctuated, and geometric shapes shifted in what was probably the alien equivalent of shocked gasps. Zorp, Claxon said, in a voice that suggested children should be seen and not heard. You will remain silent. No, father, I won't. Zorp walked over to stand beside Jake, which was either very brave or very stupid. Jake Thompson didn't corrupt our technology. He improved it. He made it better. He made it work. You were contaminated by exposure to primitive methods, Vexkic said, their form shifting into what might have been concern. Your judgment has been compromised. My judgment is fine, Zorp said. What's compromised is our engineering philosophy. We've become so obsessed with perfection that we've forgotten about functionality. Jake's repairs work better than anything we've ever built, and we're calling that heresy. Jake looked at the young alien standing beside him, defending human engineering to the most powerful technology consortium in the galaxy. Kid, you're either very brave or very stupid. I prefer to think of myself as very right, Zorp said. Supreme Engineer Claxon looked at his son, at Jake, at the evidence of human engineering that was somehow superior to alien technology, and at the assembly hall full of diplomats who were waiting to see whether this confrontation would lead to humanity's acceptance into galactic civilization or its destruction. Human Jake Thompson, he said finally, you present us with an impossible situation. Your methods work, but they should not work. Your results are superior, but they violate every principle we hold sacred. Your approach is primitive, but it achieves what our most advanced engineering cannot. So what do we do about it? Jake asked. Claxon was quiet for a long moment, his metal features shifting through what might have been a dozen different expressions. We settle this the way engineers should settle disputes, with a practical test. What kind of test? Agent Collins asked. A repair challenge, Claxon said. You, Jake Thompson, against our best engineers, we will present you with a device that has been broken for over a century, something that our greatest minds have declared irreparable. If you can fix it using your primitive methods, humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Confederation as technological equals. And if I can't fix it? Claxon's glowing eyes fixed on Jake with the intensity of a star-going supernova. Then you will accompany us to stand trial for technological heresy, and Earth will remain a probationary world for another 1,000 years. Jake looked around the assembly hall, at Agent Collins who was nodding encouragingly, at the alien delegation who were waiting to see whether human ingenuity was really superior to alien sophistication, at the reporters who were broadcasting this moment to every inhabited world in the galaxy. All right, he said, but I'm going to need my toolbox. The device they brought Jake looked like someone had tried to build a sculpture out of nightmares and mathematical equations. It was roughly the size of a refrigerator, made of materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid depending on how you looked at them, and it hummed with a sound that made his teeth itch. This, Supreme Engineer Claxon announced with the kind of pride reserved for showing off family heirlooms, is a Zephyrian consciousness transfer matrix. It was created by the most advanced civilization in our recorded history, a species that transcended physical existence over 1,000 years ago. Jake walked around the device, his toolbox in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. The alien delegation watched him like he was a bomb that might go off at any moment. The human delegation watched him like he was their last hope. The galactic media watched him like he was the most interesting thing to happen in the universe since the invention of faster-than-light travel. What's it supposed to do? Jake asked. It allows the transfer of consciousness from one physical form to another, Ambassador Thiss explained, their crystal decorations chiming softly. In theory, it could grant immortality by allowing beings to transfer their minds to new bodies as their original forms age or are damaged. And what's wrong with it? Everything. Enforcement Director Vexic said, their geometric form shifting into what might have been frustration. It has not functioned for over a century. The quantum consciousness matrices became destabilized during the fall of the Zephyrian civilization. Our best engineers have attempted repairs for decades. The device is considered impossible to fix. Jake set down his coffee and opened his toolbox. Well, impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet. For the next hour, Jake poked, prodded, and examined the consciousness transfer matrix while 36 of the galaxy's most powerful beings watched his every move. The device was incredibly complex, far more sophisticated than anything he'd worked on before. It operated on principles that he didn't understand, using technologies that human science hadn't even theorized yet. But underneath all the complexity, it was still just a machine. And machines, no matter how advanced, all had the same basic problems when they broke down. The issue, Jake said finally, is that this thing is trying to do too many things at once. Elaborate, Claxon commanded. Jake pointed to what looked like a crystal lattice that was somehow both solid and translucent. This consciousness matrix is trying to maintain perfect quantum coherence while simultaneously interfacing with biological neural networks while also projecting into dimensional substrates I don't even have names for. It's like trying to juggle while riding a unicycle while solving calculus problems. The Zephyrians were masters of multi-dimensional engineering, Thiss said. Their technology was designed to operate across multiple reality layers simultaneously. Yeah, and that's the problem. Jake pulled out what looked like a perfectly ordinary screwdriver. You can't maintain perfect balance in 6 dimensions when you're dealing with the real world. Real world is messy, things vibrate. Energy fluctuates, dimensions shift. You need buffers. Buffers. Vexic's geometric form shifted into what might have been confusion. Shock absorbers. Redundancy. Backup systems. Ways to keep working when everything isn't perfect. Jake started carefully removing components that looked like they cost more than his entire hometown. The Zephyrians built this thing to work perfectly in perfect conditions, but perfect conditions don't exist. So how do you propose to fix it? Claxon asked. Jake grinned, and several alien beings took an involuntary step backward. The same way I fix everything else. Make it less perfect and more reliable. What followed was the most watched repair job in galactic history. Jake worked on the consciousness transfer matrix for 6 hours while beings from across the galaxy watched via quantum broadcast. He removed precision components and replaced them with simpler alternatives. He added stabilizing elements made from materials that could be found in any hardware store. He installed backup systems that weren't elegant but were virtually indestructible. This is madness, Claxon muttered, as Jake soldered what appeared to be a common transistor into a quantum consciousness matrix. You're connecting technologies that are separated by millions of years of development. That's the point, Jake said, not looking up from his work. Your ancient technology is amazing at the complicated stuff. My simple technology is amazing at the reliable stuff. Put them together, and you get something that's both complicated and reliable. The most controversial moment came when Jake pulled out a roll of duct tape. Absolutely not, Claxon said. I will not allow you to desecrate a Zephyrian artifact with primitive adhesive materials. This isn't desecration, Jake said. This is reinforcement. See this quantum resonance chamber. It's designed to maintain perfect harmonic frequencies. But if it gets bumped, or if the temperature changes, or if someone sneezes too hard, the whole thing goes out of alignment. He carefully applied strips of duct tape to strategic points on the device. Duct tape doesn't care about quantum frequencies. It just holds things together. It's not fancy, but it works. You cannot simply tape advanced technology together. Thiss protested, their crystal decorations chiming with what sounded like alarm. Watch me, Jake said. When he finally stepped back, the consciousness transfer matrix looked like it had been repaired by someone who had never heard of aesthetic principles. Duct tape was visible in several places. Copper wiring connected ancient alien crystals to modern human electronics. A small fan from a desktop computer was somehow integrated into the multi-dimensional projection system. It was an abomination that violated every principle of advanced engineering. It was also working. The device hummed to life with a sound like a symphony orchestra tuning up in a cathedral. Lights that had been dark for over a century began to glow. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing readouts in languages that had been dead for millennia. Impossible, Claxon whispered. The quantum consciousness matrices are stable, Vexic said, their geometric form cycling through what might have been amazement. The dimensional interface is operating within normal parameters. The neural linkage systems they're functioning better than the original specifications indicated they should. Jake picked up his coffee, which had gone cold while he was working. Sometimes the best way to fix something complicated is to make the complicated parts more simple. You have done something that our greatest engineers declared impossible, Fisk said, their crystal decorations playing a melody that sounded like wonder. You have restored functionality to a device that had been broken for over a century. And you did it, Zorp added, with obvious pride, using duct tape and a computer fan. Supreme Engineer Claxon stared at the restored consciousness transfer matrix, at the impossible fusion of ancient alien technology and modern human engineering, at the proof that sometimes the best solution is the one that works rather than the one that looks impressive. Human Jake Thompson, he said finally, you have proven that your species possesses something that ours has forgotten in our pursuit of perfection. You have shown us that functionality is more important than elegance, that reliability is more valuable than sophistication. Does that mean we pass the test? Agent Collins asked. Claxon looked around the assembly hall, at the alien delegates who were staring at the working consciousness transfer matrix with expressions of awe and confusion, at the human delegation who were trying not to look too smug, at the galactic media representatives who were probably composing headlines about the day a human mechanic revolutionized alien engineering. It means, he said, that humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Confederation. Not as junior partners, not as probationary members, but as technological equals with full voting rights and unlimited access to galactic trade networks. The cheering from the human delegation was immediately drowned out by what sounded like several different species celebrating in their own unique ways. Jake stood in the middle of it all, still holding his cold coffee, still wearing his coveralls, still looking like a small-town mechanic who had accidentally become the most famous engineer in the galaxy. So what happens now? He asked Agent Collins. Now, Collins said, you get to decide what you want to do with your new career as the galaxy's most sought-after repair specialist. We've got requests from 47 different species asking for your services. The Confederation Council wants to establish a new department of practical engineering with you as director, and Claxon Industries wants to offer you a consulting contract that would make you the richest human in history. Jake looked at his toolbox, at the impossible device he'd just fixed, at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization who were still celebrating the fact that duct tape and human stubbornness had solved a 1,000-year-old engineering problem. You know what I want to do, he said. What's that? I want to go home, finish fixing Mrs. Henderson's Buick, and maybe open a little shop where humans and aliens can work together on fixing things that are broken. Jake grinned. We'll call it Thompson's Interstellar Repair Service. Our motto will be if it's broken, we'll make it work. And if it's not broken, Collins asked, then we'll probably leave it alone, Jake said. But honestly, in a galaxy this big, there's always something that needs fixing. 6 months later, Jake Thompson was sitting in his new garage, which had been built with a combination of human construction techniques and alien materials, watching his business partner Zorp explain the finer points of quantum mechanics to a group of human engineering students, while simultaneously learning how to use a socket wrench. Outside, ships from dozens of different worlds were lined up, their crews waiting patiently for the repair services of Thompson's Interstellar Repair Service, where the impossible was fixed daily, and the only requirement was that the customer be willing to accept that sometimes the best solution was the one that worked, not the one that looked impressive. Jake took a sip of his coffee, which was now made from beans grown on 17 different worlds, and smiled. He'd always known that the best tool for any job was usually the one you already had in your hand. He just hadn't realized that sometimes the tool you had in your hand was the ability to make the impossible possible, one piece of duct tape at a time.